Public hearing, open space, lot line adjustment by Hollow, first up. There you go.
Good evening. My name is Steve Miller, and I'm with
So you gotta grab the mic over here, yes?
Certainly will be.
Behind, where this one, out here.
Can you hear me now?
There you go.
All right. Good evening, my name is Steve Miller, I'm with Beatty and Watson Surveying and Engineering. I'm here representing a lot line adjustment between lands of Open Space Institute, James Jerome, thank you, and Joshua Miller and Brianna D. Carmine. Open Space Institute owns approximately 200 acres on the west side of Bog Hollow Road in the town of Amenia. Jerome owns a small parcel with an existing house comprising about 8/10 of an acre, and Miller and D. Carmine own another small parcel with a dwelling on it, both along Bog Hollow Road, and both of which abut lands of Open Space Institute. Jerome and Miller and D. Carmine approached Open Space Institute and requested that they do a lot line adjustment to accommodate, in Miller and DeCarmine's instance, a partial driveway that was over the property line, and in Jerome's case, lawn and part of a shed that was over the property line. Open Space agreed to that. We're here seeking an approval for a lot line adjustment that will add approximately a 30 by 100 foot strip to the Miller and the Carmine property, and approximately a 25 by 250 foot strip to the Jerome parcel. There's no new improvements being proposed. None of the parcels, the smaller parcels are actually getting larger. The 200 acre parcel retained by Open Space is going to remain forever wild, or at least until the plan is for Open Space to convey the parcel to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I'd be more than happy to take any questions that anybody might have.
Should the mic off? It's open for public comment. If anyone has any public comment, feel free to come up to the podium and state your name and where you're from, and take it from there. I guess. Go ahead.
Can you tell us what the Open Space Institute is?
Yes, the Open Space Institute is a land trust that purchases property to keep it forever green. They then subsequently sometimes transfer it to another entity. In this case, it's the Fish and Wildlife Service. The Open Space Institute is a national organization with local offices, and with the intent that they're acquiring land to keep it forever green.
Is there any other public comment? Any other questions from the board?
As far as I'm good, Mr. Chairman, I did have a memo. Most of the items are relatively minor. It's called dotting i's and crossing t's, and the final signatures. The only thing I did, the agricultural data statement that's on? Yes, okay. So, Mr. Chairman, this is good to go.
Okay. Is that being said, I need to close the public
You
hearing?
can close the public hearing, sir.
Public hearing is now closed. What's our next step?
Actually, there is a resolution of approving a lot line change that Mr. Hancock has prepared, and there being overwhelming public outcry, you're free to entertain it. And if you wish, I can read the now therefore be it resolved.
Please do.
Okay. Now therefore be it resolved that in accordance with the subdivision law, the planning board grants preliminary and final approval for the minor subdivision plat entitled Lot Line Adjustment Plat prepared for James Jerriman and Joshua Miller and Brianna D. Carmine and Open Space Institute Land Trust, Inc. by Stephen P. Miller, LLS, dated May 8th, 2025, last revised May 9th, 2025, the approved plat, subject to the following conditions. Approval by the planning board attorney for the proposed deeds for conveyance of the lands involved as to form adequacy. Prior to execution of the approved minor subdivision plan, the applicant shall address the comments from the town engineer to the satisfaction of the engineer, and the signing and dating of the approved plat by owners of record following the date of last revision, and the signing and sealing of the approved plat by the surveyor, and the granting of permission to file from the Dutchess County Department of Health, and confirmation that the applicants have paid any outstanding invoices of the planning board's consultants incurred in connection with this application, and the bold letters, please note, absent an extension requested by the applicants and granted by the planning board, if all requirements of the above conditions have not been certified as completed within 180 days of this resolution, this conditional approval shall automatically terminate and be revoked without need for affirmative planning board action. Be it further resolved, the planning board hereby authorizes the planning board chairperson to stamp and approve the approved minor subdivision plans upon the applicant's compliance with the above applicable conditions and the submission requirements stated herein, if any, and please note again, in bold, the signature of the chairperson of the planning board constituting final approval of the subdivision plat shall expire within 62 days from the date of such stamping and signing, unless within such period the approved plat shall have been filed in the office of the Dutchess County Clerk. Be it further resolved that pursuant to subdivision laws, section 105.13E, no changes, erasures, modifications, or revisions shall be made on any final plat after approval is given by the planning board and signed by the planning board chair. In the event that any final plat been recorded contains such changes, the plat shall be considered null and void, and the planning board shall institute proceedings to have said plat stricken from the records of the Dutchess County Clerk's office and the town clerk's office. And be it further resolved, within 5 days of the date of this resolution, a copy of this resolution shall be filed in the office of the town of Amenia Town Clerk, and a copy of this resolution shall be mailed to the applicants within that same 5-day period. And be it further resolved that this resolution shall take effect immediately. We would need a motion, a second, and then a roll call vote, Mr. Chair.
Just want to make one comment. You have amended the resolution, and I gave the board the unamended resolution. So I didn't.
Need a motion.
So moved.
Need a second?
I'll second that motion. Okay, I have it just to discuss.
Okay, go ahead.
The only change I saw was the mention on page
Yeah.
2 of the add of the engineer.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Julie, want to do a roll call vote?
I'll-
Okay, one of these.
Robert Boyles, Union Chairperson.
Yes.
Nina Peak.
Yes.
Lizette Bullock.
Yes.
James Walsh.
It seems like an improvement, yes.
Walter Dietrich, I have marked him as absent. Kenneth Paulsky.
Yes.
Jamie Viviello, I will mark him as absent. Motion passes and carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And again, please thank the Open Space Institute for their generosity.
Okay, next public hearing, I gotta refer to our attorney first, and we'll go from there,
Yeah.
okay?
Sorry.
There you go, pass it out.
Okay, so the next matter is the Silo Ridge Condo D&E, which includes an application for an amended site plan, an amended subdivision plan, and amended master development plan. Before the board can open the hearing, because we're amending the subdivision approval that was previously granted, New York State town law requires the planning board to make a secret determination. And this is different from what normally happens for site plans and special use permits. But it is something the board needs to do before it can open the public hearing. So we have drafted a proposed resolution for the board to consider that would determine that the proposed amendment to the original 2015 project is consistent with findings that were made back in 2015 by the planning board with respect to the entire Silo Ridge development. After some discussion, internal discussion between the board members, the applicant had submitted a proposed consistency statement and submitted that to the planning board, demonstrating that the proposed amendment would not result in any new or different environmental impacts than the original project. And planning board's engineer looked at that, and in terms of the environmental impacts, it's an agreement. It is basically a reduction of proposed bedrooms from 52 to 25, so there'll be consequent less impact on wastewater, on traffic, on a lot of the impacts that had previously been looked at. Planning board members noted in the fiscal or the consistency statement provided by the applicant that there will be, because basically what the amendment does is it will replace what was originally approved, which were 13 townhomes on 13 lots, with 10 condominiums on one lot, that there will be a reduced, and the applicant acknowledged this in their consistency statement, there will be a reduced assessed tax value for the lands that are involved. And as a result of that, the planning board would like, while they agree about the consistency of the environmental impacts, when it comes to the fiscal, they would like to see some additional information from the applicant to see what that actually means in terms of local impacts. So they asked that we add some language to this. There's a whereas clause that I've added. Whereas the planning board finds that the proposed amendment will result in substantially reduced assessed taxable value for the lands involved in the proposed amendment as compared to the project. And whereas pursuant to town law, the planning board must make a secret determination before it opens a public hearing. Now therefore be it resolved, with the exception of potential fiscal impacts, the planning board hereby determines that the proposed amendment is consistent with previously adopted 2015 seeker amended and restated findings adopted by the planning board, and that no further seeker review of the proposed amendment is required. Be it further resolved that the applicant is requested to provide a fiscal analysis of local tax revenue impacts of the proposed amendment as compared to the original project. Be it further resolved that a copy of this resolution shall be filed in the office of the town clerk, and be it further resolved that this resolution shall take effect immediately. If that's acceptable to the board, we have a motion in a second.
Sure. We need a motion to accept this? Well, let's get it, we'll make a motion to accept this. That means, make a motion to accept it, so.
You're in a position where you can't open a public hearing.
unfortunately.
So, well, I guess the next step would be for the board to renotice the public hearings, for a future date.
Okay. At this present time, we have to notice out for another, public hearing, I guess, how long will that take? 45 days probably? Yes? No?
Well, you could actually turn it to a date certain.
You can't adjourn something.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. You could establish the date tonight.
We can establish a date, the public hearing would be when?
I have to resend out 162 notices. Nice.
Yes.
I quit. Oh, Leo, you're here.
So maybe, do we have a meeting at the end of July, is that possible? July 23rd?
I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, we can discuss any you want.
I mean, the addition to the resolution for the seeker, sorry. The language that you're proposing to add to the resolution requires the applicant to demonstrate, to provide some additional fiscal impact analyses to substantiate the $20 million difference in assessed, like to see what impact that would have on the town.
That's
Correct, so right now, just so that we're all understanding what we're talking about, in the applicant seeker consistency statement, they say, the total assessed, taxable assessed value of 13 townhomes is $28 million. The taxable assessed value of 10 condos is $7.5 million. This results in a net change reduction for the taxable assessed value of $20 million, which would represent an approximate 4.1% reduction in total project assessed value. So the question that was, the statement that's added to the seeker consistency resolution is just asking the applicant to show what change, what impact that would have on local town expected tax revenue. That's the question, right? And theoretically, we could make a seeker consistency determination tonight pending the receipt of that additional information, correct?
Yeah.
Which is what your statement said, right?
Keep what you're talking.
Yeah, which is what your statement said, right? Notwithstanding, I don't remember the exact language, but there was some language in there that said, that you proposed. We could make the determination, open the public hearing, and keep it open until we get the additional information.
Okay.
Is everybody on board? I mean, let's talk about that. That's the matter that's on the table right now.
Oh, you must say- Paul, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman,
Didn't wait on- Please. I'm very good.
Mr. Chairman, I believe the consistency statement identified that as well, because I remember the number being $43,000 as an impact of tax revenue that was associated with that reduction. So that is the net impact to taxes coming into the community is $43,000. And that does not account for the fact that Solid Ridge has never generated a single school child, irrespective of what was identified in the original findings. And it does not account for the fact that the values of all the buildings, be it the HOA buildings, family barn, things of that nature, and the individual houses are much greater than were ever anticipated in 2015. So we didn't even take those elements into account. If you take those elements into account, it is on map. Did you hear me? Okay, I apologize for not holding it close. If you take those elements into account, far outweigh the $43,000 differential associated with the reduction in value from going from townhomes to condos. The school children element by itself generating zero school children way outweighs that. So, but I think that number was in there identifying the number that you asked to be identified was $43,000 actually.
Is there actually 48?
48.
I apologize, I wrote it a little while ago, so I was off my back on some, my apologies.
It's okay. I just had it in front of me.
With another sentence after that says similar analysis can be conducted for the school, county, and fire.
Our belief when we wrote that, just thinking about the school children here and having generated none, it's very obvious that that supersedes the $48,000, excuse me. Substantial order of magnitude, and didn't warrant the type of analysis to do. But I leave that to the board. If they want me to go through that exercise, more than happy to provide that information. But I just wanted to bring up that I believe the information was contained in the consistency. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
For the opportunity.
So with that amendment on, what's your pleasure? You want to move forward with this or not? So, yes or no?
Well, I mean, why don't we get the revised, because that's what it sounds like, we got revised fiscal implications. My feeling is we can pass this pending receipt of an examination and make a determination at that time. I mean, basically.
You're not making a decision on the project tonight, we make the public hearing open, get that additional information about the school district. Maybe some of the information that Patrick was talking about some of the other value, fiscal value that the project is providing, so that it can bring this more in line, so there isn't a $48,000 discrepancy, reduction what's coming into the town.
Okay, is it appropriate also to talk about the housing committee, whether they responded to this project at all?
And,
I'm sorry?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a related question, if you want to talk about it now, we can as well.
I'm suggesting that we keep that separate and apart
Okay.
from this. And the only thing here is just the revenue issue.
Right. Because that's more relevant to the question of whether you keep the public hearing open and not.
I mean, open public hearing again.
If you make.
Get that far.
So, you want, is there a motion potentially then?
I'll make that motion.
And I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Roll call, Mr. Chairman. Robert Boyles, Chairman.
Yes.
Nina Peak, Deputy Chairperson.
Yes.
Lizette Bullock.
Can you just restate what the motion is? Is the additional?
The additional language
Yeah.
for the additional.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. James Walsh.
Yes.
Walter Dietrich is still absent. Ken Chmelsky.
Yes.
And Jamie Vitiello is still absent. So the motion passes. You've got a consistency statement on the table. You are free, if you wish, to open the public hearing. And in doing so, Mr. Chairman, you have to specifically identify that it is for a preliminary subdivision. Yep. Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to.
Gotcha. We're over the public hearing for condos, the salary, which have seen the preliminary stuff for this. And, public hearing now open.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Pat O'Leary on behalf of Silo Ridge. Thank you for the opportunity to present here before the public. Under discussion tonight at Silo Ridge, the original approved plans contained 13 townhomes along Eagle Pass. There's very little demand in the marketplace for townhomes at this point. And Silo Ridge has made a decision to attempt to remove the 13 townhomes as shown here and replace them with 10 condominiums shown here. 6 units in building B, 4 units in building E. The remaining land is just land at Silo Ridge to be considered at a future time. If you look at the comparison between these from an environmental analysis, there's no increase in any utility demand. In fact, there's a decrease in utility demand here. Aesthetics, the massing of the buildings, essentially the same. Architecture of the buildings, very similar between what's being proposed and what was identified in the original master plan and site plan. The consistency statement was very clear relative to all the environmental constraints, and we believed it was clear relative to the fiscal differentials between here. For example, not contained in that $48,000 delta. There are 3 more units that will ultimately be placed somewhere else on Silo Ridge. They may be individual single-family homes, they may be condominiums. If you take the value of 3 single-family homes at Silo Ridge and take the incremental tax increase associated with that, overcomes the $48,000. If you take into account the fact that they generate 0 school children while paying the school taxes, though the original EIS assumed, I believe Silo Ridge would generate 15 or 18 children, I think something of that nature. If you think about the savings with 0 school children being developed, absolutely overcomes that $48,000. Numerous ways, the values of the buildings having been built overcome that $48,000. There's a huge net windfall in tax associated with Silo Ridge. So I'm very surprised that people would look at the $48,000 and possibly suggest it was an adverse impact to the community when there are so many beneficial impacts from a tax standpoint for it. But I won't belabor that point, and we will provide any additional information from that perspective if it's not already in there. All the plans have been reviewed by staff, engineer. We believe we have addressed comments on the subdivision plan, site plan, and master plan, consistent with all design standards, both for Silo Ridge and the Alameda community. There may be 1 or 2 comments outstanding. I think on the subdivision plan, Mr. Andrews had a note or something that was a very minor change there. And we think that this is good for Silo Ridge, it's good for the community. There's very little demand for the townhomes. Not building anything here, if you want to talk about a tax revenue loss, not building anything there would be a tax revenue loss. Much more significant than $48,000. So I respectfully request, the board move forward with the public hearing tonight, get public input on this, and if they could please identify specifically the numbers they would like us to demonstrate to them, so that I don't have to guess and decide to put that together. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to turn it back to you.
Sure, thank you.
For questions.
John?
First off, you did hear from Dutchess County. They got back to a referral. It's been identified as a matter of local concern that was actually received today, so that checks 1 box. Mr. O'Leary is essentially correct. The comments in my previous review memos have been satisfactorily resolved, except for there's some minor modifications to the final plat. We've got to get the owner's notes changed appropriately, but they are, one would call dotting i's and crossing t's. Essentially, the information is there. I have no further concerns. I think there's a couple key points that need to be made, just to put this in perspective. The area surrounding this proposed development is essentially already developed. This is like there's a piece of a puzzle missing, they're just plugging it in. The utilities exist, the lighting exists, the landscaping exists. The other things, everything's been designed in compliance with the design standards and technical requirements associated with the original plan. As with other situations in the development, we do have a sign-off from the Silo Ridge Design Review Committee indicating that this is acceptable to them. And there are no approvals from any outside agency that are occasioned by this modification. Everything here is consistent with those outside approvals. So Dutchess County is not involved, DOT is not involved, and DEC is not involved. So there is nothing in this proposal that cannot be implemented in a manner that complies with or falls within the thresholds associated with the original Silo Ridge Field Club approvals.
Paul? Any public comments this time? Any board comment? Okay, go ahead. The mic turn on, Steve Green. Oh, Paul.
Is the mic on?
Yeah, never mind.
No.
There you go.
Yes. My name is George Pastranson. I live at 3298 and 343 Intermedia. It's my understanding that every year, we residents of Silo Ridge sue the town about their taxes, about how much they're paying in taxes, their assessment. And I don't know how significant that is, what the amount is, but as long as you're looking into the tax revenue, maybe ask Donna Depot about how much it's costing the town these suits. And that might be something that you might want to take into consideration.
Any other public comment this time? Any board comment this time? We'll hold the public hearing, stay open at this present time, correct? So there's no other public comment? Yes.
Chairman, as mentioned during the presentation, I'd like to respectfully request from the board, or members of the board, the specific information we would like to see with additional fiscal analysis. As I noted, much of it was provided in there. I think it was correctly, accurately stated. And so if there was more information beyond what was provided, I respectfully request that you identify that so that we can fully and completely satisfy your request.
Completely agreeable. I'll ask him again, is there any comment from the board at this present time?
I would like to send our notes to Paul within this week. Any of us would have notes, and you can just draft a consistent document reflecting all the notes of the board. So, and with the stipulation that we will get it to you within the week, so you'll have a copy. Okay?
So at that point, could we please be placed, obviously we could not be on the next agenda for the public hearing because of the time frame. We have to be 11 days, so this will be subject to the 11 days prior to the next meeting.
No, the public hearing's staying open, so you should be fine.
So if we get this to you.
Correct?
Yeah, you have not yet decided what date you want to
Right.
utilize,
We-
but if you adjourn it to a date certain, for
Right.
instance, the next available meeing, they automatically go on the
Exactly.
agenda, and if they get their stuff in at least a week in advance of the meeting, you give Mr. Van Cott and you folks a chance to get it there, that should be sufficient, sir.
I think it's the board, if it's possible for the board to try and come and see with a couple of days, I could probably, give them enough time to get something in next week.
That would be perfect, and I'll have it back to you for next Wednesday, so.
Next meeting is
9th.
July 9th. So hopefully this all,
Respectfully request to.
hopefully it all goes together, they get the comments, and everyone has their comments. Maybe a formal letter, all the comments, continue about here.
They might have a functioning sound system by then also.
Hopefully.
We had already scheduled the workshop for that night too.
To that end, while I'm still here, the public hearing is still open, and this is not part of it, Mr. Chairman, I think I would like to request to push the workshop meeting
the following,
to the following meeting.
Twenty-third,
Okay.
July.
I do have a very busy schedule.
July
We don't-
23rd.
Our goal is not to
I get it.
monopolize the planning board here, so we
Okay, sounds good. So we'll see.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You got it. All right, we'll continue on into our regular meeting. Cascade Creek subdivision draft. Concerning findings.
Yes, of course.
You guys all right?
Go ahead.
All right, hello, board. Chairman Boyles, good to see you again. It's been a while. So, glad you're back.
For a little while.
Yeah, oh, we'll take it. We'll take what you give us. So we're here tonight to discuss the Cascade Creek subdivision conservation finding statement. So just a quick recap over the past couple of weeks. The last meeting we discussed this, I believe, was 2 weeks ago.
May 14th.
May 14th, thank you. So at that meeting, we received a couple of comments from the board, then their consultants to make some final revisions to the conservation analysis narrative itself, which we then submitted. And then 2 weeks or so went by and I received an additional set of requests for comments last Friday, which I believe I thoroughly addressed in this latest round of revisions. And it also reviewed the conservation finding statement, which, as the board is aware, this is the document that allows us to proceed with the preliminary subdivision review. With that, we received the draft conservation finding statement and have no particular comment on that. And we're just looking forward to moving this along, getting the conservation finding statement adopted by the board, and then proceeding with the preliminary subdivision review where everything that we've already discussed, including utilities, stormwater management, layouts, erosion control management, will be more thoroughly addressed. And just to recap some of the revisions is this latest round of revisions I provided, we're going into a little more detail on the utilities, meaning subsurface sewage disposal systems, water supply systems, and stormwater management. So the latest round of revisions in this narrative go into how they will, one, help protect some of these conservation areas that are located within. Two, how the installation of said systems will really provide very minimal impact, being that they are subsurface. They're not going to be visible for the most part, and then will allow the site to return to open fields and open space. And then three, the long-term maintenance of these facilities, which again, because of how they're designed, conceptually at this point, but because of how they're designed as relatively low maintenance, being that the access to them will consist of typical, safer septic systems, typical pumping of septic tanks or cleaning that most people within a residential neighborhood these days who has a septic system has to do every year. There's also an explanation about maintenance of stormwater management practices such as basic landscaping, essentially, which is mowing, pruning, and just a removal of sediment buildup. And so generally, we feel that how we've designed this subdivision will actually provide a conservation benefit to the land, to the neighbors, and to the community as a whole. So with that, I'm happy to answer any of the board's questions tonight and see what we can do to get this finding statement adopted. So with that, thank you, board, and happy to answer questions.
I have a question. I'm confused, you said that it will actually be a conservation benefit when you're putting in a bunch of houses and septic systems? How does that turn, where there's nothing existing now, how does it become a benefit over what's there now? I guess.
So the septic system, that's really the big question, right? The septic system is a subsurface sewage disposal system. Everyone has them, almost everyone has them. They are designed to New York State and then a higher level of Dutchess County standards where it goes into the treatment so that the actual wastewater is treated as it goes through this system. So really, maybe it's not a benefit per se, the system, but it would say no impact on that
Okay,
particular
no
item.
impact,
No impact,
I understand.
yes.
Can we get a copy of Michael Nowicki's reports?
Yes, I believe they're in the appendix of the conservation analysis document, and it's also summarized in the flora and fauna sections.
Thank you.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hi. To Ken's point, I have a piggyback question on the subsurface sewage treatment systems. This may just be my ignorance about conservation lands, but in the report, it says that these subsurface improvements, wells, subsurface sewage systems, water tanks, and so forth, will be located within currently conserved lands. So in the conservation areas you're putting the sewage, that seems counterintuitive to me. Can you help me understand?
If I may.
Yeah, please.
Basically, your town code allows access roads, driveways, local utility distribution lines, subsurface wastewater disposal systems, trails, temporary structures for outdoor recreation, and agricultural structures on preserved open space land, with the provided that they do not impair the conservation value of the land. So, as long as they don't impair the reasons that you're seeking to conserve it, you can place them there. Is that?
Because there's subsurface that does not have the impact.
Well, basically, when you start to look at this, you have to kind of look at why we're preserving certain things and what's going to be accomplished. So if you read the language of it, the proposed infrastructure doesn't meet the definition of the structure under your code. So therefore, it's consistent with the open space, number one. And yes, because it's subsurface. The infrastructure involves basically wells, subsurface water, subsurface electric utilities, subsurface on-site wastewater treatment systems, stormwater management systems, either surface or subsurface design to treat runoff. The majority of this infrastructure is located subsurface, so there's no visual impact. One of the preservation values that you've identified is the visual aspect of the open space. So these will impair that. The design of the infrastructure can be arranged so as not to impede or alter wildlife habitat or connectivity on the site. One of the conservation values to be preserved was kind of preserving the ability of wildlife to move through the site, generally along the stream corridor and around the perimeters. So this stuff can be arranged so it doesn't impede that or have impact. Doesn't need necessarily to be fenced, doesn't need to have, hedgerows or other things around it, but it can be in open areas. In other words, we won't have to take down trees because there's already a lot of open areas. And so you don't have it clearing on steep slopes. The infrastructure does not require the removal or relocation of soils. One of the major things on this site, if you recall, is that it's prime agricultural soil. We don't have to basically take it out, and for the most part, it doesn't get disturbed. It's always going to be there. And they propose to use some of it for community gardens. So I think the bottom line here is that they've made a case that what they're proposing is allowable under the code and doesn't impair the conservation values that have been identified as worthy of being preserved. Does that help?
That's helpful, thank you.
I have another question. Hi, we never really discussed any grading. I know there's a rise in the center. What kind of grading will be done there?
So for right now, we can't get into the discussions of what is actually going to be graded here. I'm assuming they're referring to this area right here. This rise,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
So right now, again, we haven't really gone into the design because that's more preliminary subdivision review. So right now, what we're doing is identifying areas to be conserved, right? What I can tell you though is that naturally, this area, the way we've arranged the property lines, is that you can't really disturb in those areas for construction of any buildings because of how the setbacks have been arranged. So right now, we don't really anticipate disturbing any of those slopes or within the existing tree line that's in that area.
Okay, and I'm just looking at the code for erosion and sediment control, and it discusses that also during construction. So that we will discuss when we finish, we go to the next step.
That is correct, sir.
Okay.
And Ken, so what is going to be prepared as part of the preliminary subdivision set is a stormwater pollution prevention plan,
Okay.
which goes into exactly how we are going to stabilize the site, minimize disturbance, and keep the habitat preserved. So, yep, that's all going to be addressed as part of this subsequent set of plans and documents we'll prepare.
Thank you. Okay.
That's all.
You need to hang this on like a cord or something.
Yeah, that's all. This will.
Ken and I didn't confer about this before, but he's asked some of my questions already. So I just have one more for you. In the report, it talks about regular water quality testing. Just wondering who would be doing that?
So this is a requirement for a public water supply system, which the community will be a part of. Regular testing is required when you become a public water supply. So what the applicants would do, and it is their obligation as the administrator of this public water supply, is hire a professional tester who will come in, I'm not sure specifically, but I believe it is weekly testing to make sure that the site is not exceeding any of the listed pollutants that I had included in the report. So that again is a weekly testing and is submitted to New York State as part of their speedies discharge permit and water supply.
Is that testing during the project construction or even during, after?
In order to get approvals, they will need Dutchess County Department of Health approval, as well as New York State DEC approval for wastewater disposal and water supply. During the water supply process, they're gonna have to drill wells, they're probably gonna have to prepare test reports on those wells, and the test reports will not only address water quantity, but water quality as well. So all that gets tested before they get their approvals. When it comes to wastewater disposal, they're gonna need to do field testing, and a few other things to demonstrate compliance with the necessary standards. Once they get designed, implemented, and approved, they become public water supplies. That's a whole regulation underneath the state. They have all sorts of monitoring and requirements that are done annually, weekly, in some cases daily. Wastewater disposal, a little less regulated, but it is also regulated. In both cases, no, it's not sure yet, but I imagine they're going to have to form transportation corporations or some variation thereof in order to own, operate, and maintain them. And they're subject to strict scrutiny.
Yeah, and then they'd have to report to the state after
That's
the
correct.
construction is, okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Any other questions this time? On the board? So, next thing is to bring them back, all guys.
Yeah,
Go ahead, speak up, here's the mic.
So what we've done, because question, in prepared draft conservation findings for the board, and reviewed them one of the previous meetings, and the question was raised at that time about this whole, you're gonna have some of your development, you're gonna have your septic systems, your stormwater measures in the conservation areas. And so you wanted more detail about how that would not impair the conservation values of the proposed project. And so what we've done, if you look at the draft conservation findings that we have prepared. And I wasn't able to find them in, package. 2 weeks, I think, Well, what we had done was we added, and we sent this around, there's a finding that the board makes that the project will include construction and maintenance of wells, wastewater treatment systems, stormwater treatment practices, and community garden-related infrastructure, and paths along with power to serve the wells in the community garden in the Cascade Creek stream corridor. And if you recall, Cascade Creek stream corridor is an 11.55 acre area that is primarily along Cascade Creek. And within this corridor, there are steep slopes, forested areas, and agricultural soils. And the bulk of the site's forested areas are also located there. So what we were tasked with doing is coming up with findings based on information submitted by the applicant that would show that these elements of the project would not impair the conservation values. And so we developed bullets. And keep in mind, again, as the applicant's consultant pointed out, you're at a preliminary stage here where you're identifying the conservation areas, the values that they provide, and as part of that, with these elements, showing how they will impair those conservation values, you're going to be able to essentially enforce that or require that through your review of the subdivision, once you get beyond the conservation findings, and you also will be doing, continuing to do a secret review. So the bullets that we identified for how the project will not impair the conservation values. The proposed infrastructure does not include any structures that would not be consistent with open space. The infrastructure primarily involves subsurface elements with minimal or no visual impact and employs appropriate vegetative screening where necessary. The subsurface infrastructure and any limited infrastructure above the surface is designed or will be designed to not impede or alter wildlife habitat or connectivity. The design of the infrastructure avoids or sufficiently minimizes the need for clearing and avoids steep slopes. The design and implementation of the stormwater management facilities controls stormwater runoff, volume, and quality, actually improving Cascade Creek water quality. The design of the project includes plans and maintenance of the infrastructure. Again, that was another major point that was raised by the board at the meeting where this was discussed. Was, you have to go and maintain your septic systems. How are you going to do that? Well, they're going to have to come up with a maintenance plan as part of their design that will minimize the impacts of maintenance activities and provide for restoration of any affected areas to its prior condition. So with those bullets, so long as they're undertaken and they're built into your review of the subdivision, we believe, I think John and I both believe that provides a basis for your finding that these elements will not impair the conservation values that you're trying to protect through this conservation subdivision.
Okay.
sorry. At the last meeting, I asked the representative that's here from HRH if this was affordable housing or workforce, and his answer was he honestly didn't know. Reading the document, it says the proposed, let's see, lots by a conservation subdivision which will be used to provide workforce housing options to low to medium income residents. Is this workforce? Is this affordable housing? Which one is it?
Mary Lane from Hudson River Housing. This is housing that's going to be affordable to people that are under 8% of the area median income. So whatever.
The definition of affordable housing, the 80%, right.
So if that's your town's definition, that means affordable housing.
Okay. I'm confused when it talks about low income, because some people, we think low income, we think Section 8, or we think
Where do we, I don't think we mentioned low income housing anywhere.
used to provide workforce housing options to low to medium income residents. It's your document,
Okay.
your conclusion. So, I just
Well,
want
that should be omitted. It should be, it's affordable housing as defined by yours.
to, by our code. Okay, thank you.
I apologize for the.
No, it's not,
Sure.
it's not a,
Understandable.
Okay, maybe it's not the right time, but I'm concerned about the use of water. How much water will be used on a daily basis and where is it going?
And we're gonna answer all those questions if you let us get to the next phase of this. It's not that we're trying not to
It's
answer.
a concern.
I understand, it's certainly of interest to us and something that we're paying very close attention.
and it does help you to know our concerns going forward, so you can
Right.
kind of pre-address them.
Absolutely. We just had a meeting with,
Tom Cusack with WSP, who's going to be providing supplemental documentation on the water preservation aspect of this project.
I just had a couple of questions. One, I think it would be helpful if, John and Paul, you could sort of review for the board and for the folks here, what happens, you know, given the conservation findings, what's the next step, what's going to be required of the applicant following that? And also note in particular the section in Paul's findings here that say, number 4, finally, the planning board recognizes that it may revise these conservation findings based upon field analysis of the site and additional information developed in the course of its seeker and special use permit review of the project. So maybe also talk about what the consequences of that would be. That would be very helpful.
That's that one.
Yeah.
That's the other one.
So the next step here is, if the board adopts these findings, that also gives the applicant the green light to submit a preliminary subdivision plat to the board. The backdrop is the applicant, this is sort of a preliminary step. The applicant has basically done its conservation analysis to try and identify, because it has to protect 50% of the lands on the site permanently from development. So they've identified those lands. We have 2 different conservation areas that add up to more than 50% of the lands. And so the board is making findings based on that. This basically provides the layout for the subdivision in terms of, you know, the areas that could potentially have houses in it and the lands that have to be permanently preserved. And we can take that information and we can put it on a preliminary plat and bring that back to the board for review. As part of that review, the board will be doing a seeker analysis on the project as proposed. So you're continuing to look at the potential impacts of the project, whether it's how much water is going to be withdrawn, or the issues related to stormwater, any of the environmental issues as part of your environmental review. Because they'll have the opportunity to provide that additional detail now that they know basically what the layout, the overall layout of the the project would be. You know where the conservation areas are, and you know where the houses can go. So you can do that level of detail in terms of their application and your review. Once you get to a point where you're satisfied that they've provided sufficient information, once again, because it's a subdivision, we will need to make a secret determination. That secret determination could be that there is no potential for significant adverse environmental impacts. And at that point, you could open the public hearing. You could also, if you find that there are, where there is a potential for significant adverse environmental impacts, you can require that an environmental impact statement be done, because you want to have your analysis that has already been provided about the potential impacts of the project given for a given issue. At some point, whether it's if you do a negative declaration or during the environmental impact statement process, a public hearing will be held, and the public will have a full opportunity to comment on the project. And that hearing will start on one night, may very well be continued to subsequent nights. Additionally, as part of this, it will need to be reviewed by other agencies. The applicant will be bringing information related to their progress with getting permits for other agencies and any other concerns that those agencies may have, whether it's DEC, and wildlife impacts, or whether it's the health department and wastewater or water quality impacts. So that full review will occur, and then we get to a point, and potentially where the application, we make a decision on the application, if you bring up a preliminary plat, and the applicant needs to go back and provide you with a final plat, then there would be another public hearing on the final plat, before a final decision is made, relative to the project. So it's.
To specifically, if I may,
Yeah.
to specifically jump in, I don't need the microphone when everybody's scares. To specifically jump in, the next steps are, you adopt these findings this evening. The applicant then goes away and takes these findings and prepares a subdivision plat that addresses what they have said. In other words, there'll be a stream corridor preservation area, there'll be a perimeter preservation area, there'll be open space. They prepare a subdivision plat, they update their full environmental assessment form, they update many of the appendices that were previously given to us. They have the Nowicki report, I believe they did a traffic study, they're looking with, we're working with WSP for water. So they would put together basically what would be an expanded full environmental assessment form, part one, and then you start your review. And then all the questions that you've raised, traffic, water supply, wastewater disposal, all become germane and fall on the table. And it becomes the applicant's job to give you the information you need to make a reasoned determination in each of those categories.
Is that available to the public, their report with their?
Absolutely.
Okay.
All the information, anything that the applicant provides to the planning board is publicly available information. All that people need to do in a freedom of information law request. And
So it is pending a FOIA request. And so the people, the residents who are here will have to, if they want to see it, will have to do a FOIA request.
I believe we also keep it up on the website as well, a lot of that information.
Certainly, we would be willing, once the stuff is submitted to the planning board, anything that is submitted, we would be willing to share with anyone who asks, once it's submitted.
I just want to make sure they know what will be available where.
Sure.
And I think it's also, don't we have everything up on the website as well?
I have no idea.
We can make that if that's the pleasure of the board, once it gets submitted, that can be made.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
So do we need a motion accepting?
Yes.
I'll make a motion to accept the conservation findings.
I'll second that.
Second, all in favor?
I abstain.
Aye.
I,
Nay. So passes.
Renee,
Okay.
so we have that four.
Three.
No,
Does pass.
no,
We have a quorum, the majority of the quorum votes in favor.
Right.
It's not the majority of those, including those who are absent.
it's always gotta be the majority of the board.
It's gonna be, yeah,
Yeah,
majority of the fully constituted board has to be four.
Four.
yeah.
I know nay. So, not old.
Can I just make a comment?
Sure.
So this isn't market rate housing, it's affordable housing. Okay? We don't have the liberty to, when costs are added to it, to just jack up the price. This is gonna have to be calculated to be affordable for people under 80% of the area median income. So our prices are capped, right? We put this application in on December 7th. Every word that Paul has said, every letter that he's written, same with John, same with Peter, we are paying for it. We have tons of studies done to a great cost, of which we can only carry those costs until we have a construction loan closing and can get those reimbursed by the subsidies. So we are carrying interest on those pre-development costs. So I just respectfully request that we stop dragging this along. What's gonna change? Having these other two folks here? And see how they,
At this present time, you're gonna have to wait till the other two are here, I believe, 'cause he abstained, my vote's nay, so you know, the votes
can
are
we ask
passed.
why you're saying?
28 houses. I have concern with 28 houses.
But can you talk about that during the planning board? The secret process, because that's,
I have
Where-
concern about
well,
the
that's where we can address that.
project itself.
To clarify right now is, this is just a preliminary plat, right? So as we go through the secret process, we will get into that information where we will expand on this and work to our best to address your concerns on this.
Well, you got 28 houses, you got water concerns, you got waste concerns. I'm not really clear about the conservation easements that you're talking about.
I mean, they're conserving over 50% of the land, and that's the requirement.
Well, if you're putting waste products in a parcel,
That's
that's
your
to me,
zoning
you're not
code.
conserving. Yeah, this is a very common practice with the conservation analysis. We went through it with Troutbeck, where we actually did have a full open space area where it is designed for our septic systems. So that whole area where we had dedicated as conservation lands, that is all used for septic and wastewater treatment.
I guess we could knock down the 26 houses and we'll still have the same question or issues. Maybe not the density, but we'll have the wastewater issues, the sediment issues, all of that. We can't discuss those in a manner that we can't even address those until we move to the next step. And then the next step, we can then say, no, it's got to be 24 houses, or no, the wastewater isn't, or yeah, it's still polluted downstream. So I feel, I respect what you're saying, because this just keeps it in limbo.
Right,
And
we can't
the
address.
people who are the neighbors have to keep coming back. We have to keep saying the same things over and over, like the density does bother us, or the environmental concerns. So I would like to move on to where we can discuss those and we can resolve them and at least let everyone say their voice on it. So, I mean, that's my feeling, why I know I agree with you. The number's troubling, but we can't do anything to get them or suggest they change it until.
And we want to hear those concerns, and we want to hear the public's thoughts. But we can't do that until we move on.
Correct.
So that I'd like to
So
call.
essentially, we're not making any decisions tonight.
That's right.
We're just looking for a scope.
What you're doing, it's the initial step to identify whether 50%, the 50% of the lands that they're proposing to set aside are the lands that have the most conservation value and need to be protected. And they have identified more than 50% of the lands, and they're basically saying how they will protect those lands. And that's really the only question on the table tonight. The environmental review follows.
Okay, I understand it. We voted on it. He abstained, I voted no, so we have to move on to the next thing.
Or we can call for another vote.
Again?
Yeah. So I'd like to call for another vote.
Okay,
I'll second that.
okay. We'll call vote.
Chairman Boyles.
Nay.
Okay. Ian Peak.
Yes.
Zed.
Yes.
Ken Paulson.
Yes?
Jim Walsh.
At this time, we'll say yes.
Okay, you got four yeses, it carries, we can move on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Board. We appreciate it.
And we're here to listen.
And we're looking forward to addressing your concerns with our preliminary subdivision
What
act
kind of time frame do you see before you get back with the,
as soon as possible.
We're resubmitting on July 7th, so we'll be at the July, no,
No.
July 23rd.
July 23rd.
Can I ask, in this case, because there are a lot of opinions and feelings on this, can we take a little more time of, like, once they resubmit, not necessarily vote on it, or review it at the next meeting, but go 2 meetings? Just so we have the time.
We can even want to.
Okay, I'm just make sure that we have enough time to
You
do
guys
this.
control the time.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
So, there you go.
Thank you very much, Board. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Next on the agenda is, Keene subdivision. Go ahead.
Right, good evening, Chairman, members of the board, Diana Cola, Jose Bello, and myself, Marisa Whitaker. We were here at the last meeting on June 11th. At that time, if you will recall, I know the chairman was not present, but at that time we discussed with your attorney the next steps in the secret process. And there was a discussion of the part 2 of the environmental assessment form. There was also discussion regarding the previously conducted conservation analysis, and a copy of that conservation analysis was provided to all the board members, because there is also a board member to understand the background of what had previously been studied for this subdivision application. Also at that meeting, the board authorized Mr. James to meet with our consultants, Saratoga Associates and Superintendent Engineering, to discuss the reasonable worst case scenario that we have been discussing up until now regarding what could potentially be developed on these lots. As of right now, we do not have any proposals, specific proposals for development. And so there was a discussion that was had between Mr. James and Engineering and Saratoga Associates that we feel was fruitful. I'm sure you'd want to hear from Mr. James eventually. Just wanted to give you a background of sort of where we are. We have not yet submitted the part 1 of the EAF. We are going to be doing that. I know that was an additional request that the board had made. We're going to submit that for either the next meeting or the following meeting, but we'd like to be able to update that sort of reasonable worst case scenario assumptions and rendering elements so that we have a good scope of what it is that we're going to be studying as part of the visual analysis. And I know we've submitted multiple iterations of visual analysis during the conservation analysis, that was conducted and completed in 2023, we had submitted multiple, alternatives and variations, and actually that, version, of the subdivision that was, reviewed during the conservation analysis has now been revised as part of the process that the internal process that we went through, and this is now the iteration alternative that was before the board. So, we're here to answer any questions that you might have. Would you want to?
No, I believe George James and I, we've already spoken on this, we had a very fruitful meeting. I don't want to take anything out of George James's comments, so.
Thankfully, I'm not involved in the visual aspects, Mr. Chairman, so you won't have to listen to me ramble on. That falls to Mr. James.
I will confirm that it was a fruitful conversation. I think that we're, we just, professional to professional, we just kind of cut through things, and we're able to, he was able to hear me, and we were able to hear them, and we put some things in writing, some bulleted points. Earlier today, Peter responded to those points, which we sent on Friday, and they're reasonable. And the one thing that we had asked for, we had said, before you actually do new simulations, we want to get a copy of the 3D model so that we can look at it, because not everything can be listed out in bullet points and not ever in a spreadsheet. You actually have to see it in 3D. And and they were completely amenable to that. That's fine. And so, but they wanted to get our comments so that they knew what to adopt, and essentially, if you go through this list, the one thing that we were we really wanted to see were comparables. Like, what are other estate style, homes in this area doing with their accessory buildings, right? Are they have models so that we're just not making this up, that I'm not making this up, that they're not making this up, that we have comparables so that we can say we have a basis for these assumptions that go into this. And they were amenable to that, and they're developing a listing of comparables, and they will be using that in developing the reasonable worst case development scenario. So I think we're at a very good place moving forward, and happy to get into details of the board.
Do we have any questions?
Can I just clarify one little thing? So with regard to the 3D files, I know that we've spoken with Saratoga Associates, and they're happy to provide those at their offices. So I believe that maybe that is something that you've done previously with them. I'm not sure, but it's a proprietary process, and it's a work in progress. And so it's something that they're willing to share, but not, to discuss at their offices and to show their process, but not to send at their actual files. So that's a concern that they have, because it's proprietary, and it's not really something that's typically done. They've been doing this kind of analysis for a long time, and the digital versions of digital files is something that's been around for a while. But just wanted to convey that you're invited to their offices to view those files.
Been a very long time since we've done that. But yes, we did do that a while ago. I mean, I will say that things are changing regarding that. Like, for example, if you do an application in the city of New York, for instance, they will ask for your reasonable worst case development scenario to make certain it's right. And you have to send it in. It's just standard practice at this point. But I realize we're not in the city of New York. So if that's the only way moving forward, that's not ideal. It will take more time and cost more money. But if that's the only way forward, that's acceptable.
But we will also provide, as you mentioned, we will provide I think we've identified at least 7 properties at this point where we'll be able to provide the local I think we're focusing on the Smithfield Valley area, that we can provide comparables that we discussed.
This is giving a flavor of what these estate lots will look like based on other estate lots that have been developed within the town of Medina. Just so we know we're not off base in what we're rendering. We'll provide some example imagery where that information is detailed out, so the board has it for comparison.
And I would encourage you to look a little beyond the boundaries of the media if you need to, right? Don't feel constrained, especially, you're developing a not a common product, if you will, right? And so it's more important to get the right examples than to stay within the medium.
Anyone have any questions on the board?
I just, George, if you could just be briefly summarize sort of what's next steps in your mind, for the visual impact analysis process, and then also, I guess, Diana, what your timeline is for delivering the remaining materials.
I think, what we do is we.
Good job.
All the Yankees.
Good job, Supervisor.
Assassins everywhere.
Just wait for the TV small.
I think what we do is we finalize essentially the listing of elements by lot. That's in progress right now. I think what we also want to do is we want to take a look at the comparables that we're going to use to inform the assumptions. We may want to actually have some of the board members look at the comparables because you're more familiar with this area than I am, frankly. Make certain that you all are on board with the comparables that we're using, and that they are actually acceptable for this. And then at that point, I guess you update your 3D model, we go take a look at it at the Saratoga office prior to actually the rendering of things, and then you would do the renderings at some point thereafter.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Paul. That's it.
This kind of follows on Nina's question. You know, how do we reduce that down to something that the board can digest? I mean, even with comparables, is that something that should come to the board meeting and let the board all weigh in on that? But then ultimately, how is this reduced down to something in writing that the public can weigh in on as part of the public process?
Well, the whole point of doing something like this is to develop 3D renderings of photo simulations, right? And so the point of putting all of this effort up front is to make certain those photo simulations are right? And they're showing reasonable worst-case development scenarios. Whenever you do something like this, there's a whole bunch of mishigas behind the scenes, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're trying to come to terms with right now. I would say, Paul, is that, what's important is that product at the end, that's a photo simulation that you or anyone in the public can look at and say, yes, this is what we want, no, this is what we want, or, maybe we can do things a little different if we do X, Y, and Z, right? And that all needs to be documented, right? It all needs to be explained, but how much the board needs to be involved in that process is really up to you all. I mean, you hired me to essentially work with the applicant and their consultants to make certain that it's right. That's why I'm here. One of the things I will say, when we got the comments back from the last session that we had, I had some concerns because some of the responses were, all right, well, we'll just change the restrictive declaration. And the comments that I made were technical comments. They weren't substantive comments, right? And I was just so concerned because I was like, oh, you're going to, if you incorporate these changes, you might get rid of the possibility of the white farmhouse and red barn, right? Which is an icon, right? You don't want that. And my comments were not meant to be that, right? My comments were meant to be technical. At this point, I am your technical consultant. And so, you know, I guess, you know, it's up to the board and you all in terms of how much you want to be involved in that technical side of things and how much you want to delegate.
So if I may, I mean, I think the issue here is, as we've been talking about, is moving forward, as you mentioned, the public process, right? So in the confines of SECRA, you know, if we can provide and settle on this rendering elements table that we've been working on, you know, and if that's something that the board agrees with and based upon some of the comparables, you know, in terms of how many which accessory structures we're gonna model, and then we take that, you know, we can take that, and if you want to study that further, you know, in the secret process, then that could be the scope of what's being studied, and then we go and we model it, you know, because I think the concern is if, you know, if we, I mean, we're willing and able to go forward with whatever it is that, that's required, but I think we wanna make sure that we've got, it stays within the process.
Right.
That's.
And that's what I'm suggesting, is I think that's a good way to put it, you know, I believe the board, you know, wants to have, some idea of how things are gonna be rendered, what's gonna be rendered, so that the public can, you know, buy into that or reflect on that as well, before the actual modeling is done, so you only have to do it once, right?
Simple.
Yeah.
And I think that the thing here would be to look to the professionals, what do you need to give the board to give them that level of comfort that you're looking at the right stuff? It might be, you know, like you said, it might be that simple chart that you prepared with a few other things in it. Because quite honestly, sometimes it doesn't pay to know how the sausage is being made. It just, that it is correctly made, it tastes right.
Right.
So what do we gotta do next is the question.
You folks, nothing, I don't think. I think you just release Mr. James to use his best judgment to move this ahead with the applicant.
Can I just ask one thing? Thank you. I just want to make sure we talk a lot about covenant. Talk a lot about covenant. Can I just drop? All right, we talked a lot about a covenant, and I want to make sure that the covenant has as much strength behind it as possible. So in whatever documents you do, it will always refer to as stipulated in the covenant or whatever, just so that it's not, yeah, well, we've subdivided it and then the covenant doesn't have any teeth behind it, if that makes any sense.
I mean, the purpose of the declaration is so that it would restrict future development of each of these lots. And the exhibit 1 that's attached to that declaration goes lot by lot and talks about what the restrictions are for each of those lots. So it's sort of another layer on top of what would otherwise be permitted under the zoning, right? So now this would now apply to each of the lots going forward. And what we're rendering is also within that context. So we're taking a look at what's attached to the declaration, and we're getting more into the nitty-gritty of what that would look like, based on those restrictions that we've already created.
And then just to add on to that, the covenants themselves will be enforceable by the HOA, who will be governing the site, and then it will be demonstrated to the planning board in the subsequent site plan reviews. So everything listed in that covenant, we can come back with site plan approval, and you can be like, well, the covenant says you can't do that. So, and then we have to nix it off.
Okay, let's just make sure that
Yep.
Yes.
we can say that wasn't what we approved. What we approved was all of your work plus the covenant. I want to make sure that's always there, that,
Yes.
or not right, whatever.
And so the sort of the visuals, I think the idea with the visuals, again, is because this is not site plan approval, we're looking at what's reasonable, you know, what could reasonably be developed. So if we're, in the future, if you're talking about moving a barn from a little bit over, you know, that's gonna be within what was already studied. Okay, so if it was already studied, then you can conclude that it doesn't have any additional impact. So similar to, I think, what you sort of doing with some of the other applications, it's for consistency.
Okay.
Did you all also, are you preparing an environmental assessment that's standard?
Yes.
Do you have any sense of timing on that, when I come in and present?
Yeah, I mean, it's as soon as possible on this. I wanted to get initial feedback from the planning board and George James Consultants so we can incorporate those comments into the seeker expanded document. So that's, yeah, so I am actively working on it.
Okay, is that something that will help the board kind of distill all of the information? I know some of the members have been spending some time trying to start to go through all the documents, the background documents, and get up to speed. And I just know from my own work that having that sort of a guide, you know, to point you to different documents that you want to read is very helpful, impact area by impact area.
Yep, and that's exactly what we're preparing for the board.
It just, takes a little bit
Well,
of
Time, lots of talking.
So, let's move this along,
Yeah.
you know what you gotta do,
Yeah.
right? So let's move to the next stage, let's do it then.
So,
So I think, yeah,
What are you asking for?
so I think Mike fell asleep, so I can't walk that podium right now. But,
Speak loud.
so what I'm thinking for us is that we work with George James to finalize the impact scope, right? What we're going to be rendering, what we're moving the next step. Then we will reference that scope within our seeker impact document. So that then the board can look at that and say, yep, this is going to be further study, here it is. Right? Does that make sense? We'll include that as an exhibit to that document.
Good.
Makes sense.
All right, perfect.
All right, so what do we gotta do?
Yeah, we got our marching orders.
Here we go.
Awesome, thank you, everyone.
Onward.
All right, next thing on our agenda is other matters, minutes, and we don't have people who are one meeting, not the other meeting, so we can't pull them in, so.
You all want to talk about matters about the housing committee refresh?
Yes.
Yeah, we can do that. Well, yeah, we'll do that first, and I want to clarify something. That's funny. Go ahead.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, that was mine. They're all gone now, so still the public hearing.
Just general public comment.
Anyone make public comment for tonight?
I'll say 2 words, just since you invited.
Go ahead.
Wasn't planning to, but
That's okay.
the concept of comparability is used professionally by these folks in a number of different ways. And I just wanted to point out that the view from De La Verne Hill, is that almost? The view from De La Verne Hill has no comparable comparison to be made with anything else. In other words, you can't say, as in suburban setups, this land is like that land, what you can do here, you can do there. You have the unique view from De La Verne Hill, which is one of a kind. It's in history and folklore. People get married there, and there are church services taking place there, and it's not something with comparability.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now we'll move on to other matters. Do I have 28 minutes? Did everyone read them? I wasn't there. Maybe I was there. I don't remember.
I wasn't there, but you were.
Okay.
And I think everybody sent,
Your comments in?
Yeah, I got some, yeah.
And Walter has, and they're all reflected,
All good?
yeah.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of May 28th. I mean, I can't make.
Huh?
because
I make a
we-
motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye. 6/11/25.
I have to abstain.
Yeah. I did that. 6/11/25. Did you guys review the minutes? Everything good with them?
I did, I sent you,
Okay.
yeah,
You make a motion on that one?
I can, and I will. I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes of June 11th.
Are we making, or sorry, are we approving as
As
amended?
Oh, okay, sorry.
Second years today.
I just sent mine today, sorry.
She really didn't change that much.
What was it?
She really didn't change that much.
Can you close? I changed, I don't know.
Okay,
I don't have it.
Then I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay, we'll postpone until next time.
Okay,
I did print out them, if you want a copy.
No thanks.
No, thank you.
okay. So with that being said, we'll discuss the housing.
Okay.
We're-
We need to figure out a better system for referrals to the various boards of materials. And so that it's documented maybe with like a cover sheet or that says like, hey, we are referring this material to this particular board for their review and comment, giving them a deadline, or a list of the upcoming planning boards so that it's clear when we're referring stuff, why. And we've gotten some feedback from some of the committees and some of the boards that said like, I got like a bunch of materials, but I don't really know the context or what I'm supposed to do with this or what the deadline is or et cetera. And I just think for our own record keeping purposes, it would be helpful for us to have a more structured process to do that. And maybe it is by the website, Judy, now that the website is up and running, like if we put a full folder of all the materials that are currently being reviewed for particular applications, and all of those have their own folders, then when you refer, when the planning board refers something to one of the committees, we can just do a cover letter, or, some other system where everybody is acknowledging receipt of materials on a specific date and providing a list of, yes, we received this, and this. We understand that our application is a formal referral from the planning board, and we will get our comments back to you within the required 45 days. We can put together a form, or, I don't know, I just think we need to figure out
Just
uh,
better
for,
system.
as a point of reference, most of the other towns I work with have a referral form,
Yeah.
an official document that Judy fills out, this is who it was sent to, and actually, she gives them a deadline. And so, I can probably drum up a sample and get it to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Let's take care of them. Now, my question is in the vote. What's this, any other board I ever sat on is always majority rule. What's the difference with 3 or 5 of us?
Right, and that has to be a majority of the members of the 7-member board.
So if 3 people know every time, we'll never pass anything.
Well, where is that stated?
Where?
Is that, I don't recall that.
Is that under Robert's Rules of Orders?
And I know Robert's Rules of Orders.
So the majority rules.
Yeah, it's a, town law.
Town law.
It's in
Yeah.
town law.
Yeah, the New York State town law, I'll get you this.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. I think Robert's
It's,
Rules-
it's, it's gotta be a majority of the constituted board.
Yeah.
So if your board is 7 members, it's gotta be a 4.
That's state?
State law.
No, I'd like to see it in black and white. You can tell me anything you
No,
want.
that's fair. Yeah,
But we have a ways to go with it, so let's move on.
yeah, yeah.
So with all being said and done, I need a motion for adjournment. Need a second?
We said what we had to say tonight.
Wait, can we go over quick what's on the next, what's at the next meeting, on the agenda for the night?
Briefly.
So silo conflict DD, right?
Right,
Now, I have a question. I think we had a 2-week rule for submissions before we look at anything at meetings. Is it? So tonight I heard 1 week. 1 week is not.
Well, you got something in process, is basically what it is. So you have a public hearing, so you have in the past, practice has been, to put them on the next agenda and give them a shortened window to get the specific information. So as long as it's in your hands a week in advance. There are certain people that stress that week to the Friday before, but, it is supposedly noon on the Wednesday before your meeting. So, It shortens the window, but it keeps things moving, is the intent. So a new application, you're correct, Mr. Walsh.
Okay.
And.
I'm just concerned that we don't get, it's disseminated.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
What else, Judy?
The only thing I have is cascading on Dan's, where maybe, anything else?
Yeah, but they've got to pay the rest road and.
Oh, they have.
Oh, they
They got it
did?
yesterday.
Okay, so they're on for consideration of a resolution of approval and a waiver, because they did get the fire chief.
Fire chief.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's a very bad practice, no disrespect. Fire chiefs don't like to sign their name on things, nor do they like to date things. Those of us that live in the bureaucratic nightmare world require signatures and dates. So, that makes it official. So hopefully we can get that from the fire chief.
Those are the only two things I have.
Okay.
We got that referral from the town of Stamford, are we doing anything about that?
Did you see that, Paul?
Did not.
I mean, I can think of that, all of us. There's an application at the Millbrook School for a boys' dorm that's within 500 feet of the town line, and so they made the mandatory referral, and
Is that something that you guys are interested in?
The school is already there.
Yeah, so,
I don't know if we have do we have a process for getting back to folks that submit a referral?
no, not to my knowledge.
This is the first one we've seen in a long time, so.
Well, maybe we should.
We're still on the basic.
We should
That was
make,
worried about it.
we should all make sure we get our notes on the fiscal impact of the condo residency townhouse.
Yeah.
Just to Paul, so.
And then we also need to,
You guys want to check all I want, as long as the floor adjourned, let's go to the next thing. Need a second.
Second.
All in favor? Hey, gentlemen.
Thank you.